Okay, next presentation will be done by Jan Purchase, who is a well-known decision modeling practitioner and contributor to this movement for many, many years. And Ryan Trollip is a highly experienced person in digital transformation and who works right now with James Taylor. And together they will present a new initiative directed to DMN standardization or better DMN standardization. And it's a kind of interesting initiative. So let's hear what they present.
Great, thanks, Jacob. All right, so we're here to present on DMN-onramp. So this is, and we'll explain exactly what that means, but I'm sure everybody has heard about DMN so far. You mind going to the first slide there, please, Jan? All right, so what we're going to talk about, so we'll talk about who's involved, what does it mean, what is a DMN-onramp, but why are we doing this? We'll zoom out a little bit, look at the mission as a whole for DAO and what DAO is. And then Jan will do a deep dive into outcomes, scenarios, the how of dimensions and maps, what all that means. And then a call for membership, or more like a call for participation in this. So I'm going to just get straight to the point and talk about what, what is the on-ramp? And then we can zoom out and talk about, everything around it. But, what are we trying to do here? It's just, we're seeing a lot of traction with DMN in the market, but there's also a lot of confusion, and there's problems, and we'll talk about exactly what those challenges are with DMN and DMN adoption. But we got together and started discussing ways that we can make this easier for vendors, for practitioners, academics, and so forth, in adoption and for getting traction within customers and getting ROI at the end of the day. And this whole thing boils down to essentially you can think of it as kind of like a checklist for customers when they're looking to adopt DMN services, DMN decision modeling tools, and bring in practitioners and so forth. Where do they start? Because they're not always trying to do the same things, right? We have folks that, and we work on site with customers all the time, that are looking to do maybe a decision inventory, maybe they're looking to do just the sort of structured decision making within their organization so that they can select things for automation or understand what decisions they're making. They may want to do full automation, end-to-end automation, and then you likely to use the majority of the standard. But they also, and this is quite common too, we see folks documenting decision models so that they can use them for training, for compliance, for getting consensus from other groups and so forth. So there's lots of reasons why you would do decision modeling, not just for full-blown automation. So understanding what's needed and how to approach that is important for customers to clear that. And I've had folks from the industry, vendors that are building tools around DMN, contact me and ask me questions about, how does this work? They've tried to read the standard, they're struggling with it. And if those vendors that have been doing this for decades are struggling with it, you can just imagine how customers might be struggling with it. Of course, we always point them to a good resource for that. Jan and James wrote a book on the subject, so that's always a good place to start. But having a clear a roadmap or staircase up the compliance mountain for users and vendors would be very helpful. So educate, raise awareness about DMN and its business use cases. So how to use it, where to use it. Incremental, vendor neutral. So we're obviously, this is got nothing to do with a particular set of tools or a particular vendor or anything like that. This is very general look at how to adopt these standards and get value out of those. And then start with very pragmatic, attainable goals. And this is complementary to the DMN standard. We're not trying to rewrite anything that's already in the DMN standard. we're putting a framework for getting the best value out of that standard together. And then, of course, sharing best practices. A lot of folks that contributed to this have been doing this for a long time and have sort of, had all the battle scar, tried things that worked or didn't work. So incorporating that into some of the thinking here. So who are we? So far, the folks that have been involved, and I say so far because we're opening this up now to the larger community. It's a member of DecisionAutomation.org, which is a group that's just started to essentially help propagate or increase the size of the pie of decision automation and management across the industry. We have Professor Jan Vanthienen, we have Lenny and Pierre from IBM, we've got some folks from Sparkling Logic, Mark, who knows a surprising amount of DMN, Chris Berg from InRule, and of course Jan, who's going to be chatting on today, and myself and James. So there's a collection of folks with a lot of collective experience in practical deployment of this in the industry, bringing this together. Well, why are we doing this? This is kind of a broader why. This isn't just for the DMN on-ramp. A broader why are we looking to fix some problems in the industry? So DecisionAutomation.org, we got together because it's we see that a lot of the disciplines like BPM and other kinds of disciplines out there have a much broader traction than what decision automation and management have. And Professor Jan made a point that it's not just decision automation. So wherever you see DA, it's actually decision automation and management. The management part of that is obviously very important. But we see a lot of struggle for sort of continued adoption in the real world out there for decision automation. It does not have the penetration that like BPM and other types of methodology or practices have. So we want to obviously change that, and that's the primary purpose here. So we're sort of working together, and this is the first initiative that we've kicked off, which is getting DMN more widely adopted. So the challenges that we see, obviously there's many customers that fail to achieve ROI. They do one project and they're done. Instead of doing many projects or use cases within decision automation. There's a lot of confusion and misconceptions. Everybody's marketing on different niches and frankly confusing a lot of the market sometimes. So having providing some clarity and guidance for customers on what's real and what's not, especially with all the latest and greatest stuff coming out around machine learning, and that it's obviously very, very confusing for anybody coming into the space. And we want to provide frameworks and ways that folks can easily find what tools are needed, and sort of clear through the clutter that's out there at the moment. The industry is highly fragmented. I kind of like to think of it as swimming pools. There's vendors and practitioners that live in these swimming pools, and they're very familiar with their sort of approach or their niche of the area, but they don't talk to each other across the different groups. Some folks think it's all about rules. Some thinks it's all about knowledge models, and some are all about decisions, and then there's groups that say you can solve everything by applying machine learning, for example. So there's these little pools and groups that have formed, and we sort of want to bring that together so we can get folks moving forward. And there's a general lack of analyst focus. So we especially around capturing of requirements around decision automation. You have the typical garbage in, garbage out problem. If you don't do the requirements well, those projects don't tend to achieve ROI. They don't tend to be successful. So that's why we're focusing on that area first. It's, we believe, a critical area to getting broader adoption in decision automation. So you don't mind going to the next one. So the current state of where we are. So we're very much in the early drafts. If any of you are thinking, well, why haven't I heard about this, or why wasn't I invited? The main reason here was simply that it was hard to sort of start with everybody participating when we don't have anything to start with. So the idea was to put an early draft together, just a structure around this, and then present the structure, which we'll be doing right now, and then start to get everybody to participate in this. And you will want to participate. This absolutely benefits you. Anybody working in decision automation, you know, it's having a structured approach, and especially on the requirement side of things, is very useful to getting success. Again, early draft, but you know, it's just created to acquire your participation. So please reach out, contact us. There's the emails, or you can reach out to us personally if you like. And then just one last note on that. This is not a TCK. If you don't know what a TCK is, then don't worry about it. But if you do, this is nothing to do with the TCK. We're not trying to create something that you can technically run and check that it has every sort of detail of compliance and checks every field box that's out there and runs. This is more of a conceptual sort of staircase, and Jan will go through all the details of exactly how that fits together. So I won't go into detail on that, but just understand that it's not the TCK. The general mission of DAO, so and I've already mentioned this, but just to formalize it, achieve better outcomes through improved adoption of decision automation and management. So really simple, obviously using education, materials awareness, build a community of practitioners, and sort of bring that knowledge together so that we can improve the adoption overall.
Thanks very much, Ryan, and thank you also to Jacob for that very generous introduction. Given the August audience at this conference, there will be very few people among you who don't really understand the value proposition of the decision model and notation. Nonetheless, I think it's worth restating here briefly for the few of you who don't understand it, and because it's not as widely understood as it should be. Many are unaware of the range of different ways that DMN can be used. DMN is, of course, first and foremost, a focal point for the enumeration and definition of decisions collaboratively among many stakeholders. First and foremost, business domain experts and operational controllers. It allows companies to shine a bright light on their operational decision-making, review it, and improve it where they can, and continue and subject it to continuous improvement. DMN integrates business rules, AI, machine learning, constraint logic, and very soon, I hope, additional paradigms into one coherent framework, both for the specification of decisions and the automation of them. It reduces the risks of miscommunication, and it eliminates the information loss that's typically associated with key personnel leaving a company. But first and foremost, it's a standard. It's centered on interchange, not just between DMN tools, but between these tools and third-party products, and most crucially of all, interchange between human beings. But we feel that there is a slight snag with DMN adoption that needs to be addressed as it becomes increasingly well known. It is big, and it's getting bigger. And that's not a problem in itself, but currently it makes it rather hard for new users and vendors to get on board the DMN train. Of course, everyone sees the value of a conformance-led approach, but the standard is an excellent document, but very formidable. Many people who read it are somewhat overawed by it, and it's not appropriate for every audience. So when they read the standard, many potential adopters of DMN it looks to them like a mountain that they have to leap in a single bound. It looks to them to be a very intractable problem. And this is first and foremost, I think, because there are very few levels of conformance currently defined by the standard, and they are very far apart from each other. So there's a big step between the levels, and DMN therefore comes over as being a rather all or nothing affair. And I just I don't think that's true, and I think that it need not be the case. But this perception is rather off-putting to potential adopters, and it causes problems too with vendors. Some of the harder items on the specification, for example, feel, they don't tend to fully implement or implement at all, either because it doesn't fit their current product, either because it's not a good match for the roadmap of their product, or that the product has some existing functionality which is already taking the place of the product in question, or the feature in question. And in some cases, I'm pretty sure it's due to the fact that there's an ideological opposition to certain features in DMN. And paradoxically, this leads us to a situation where we have a standard which can lead sometimes to less standardization. And this is the problem that the on-ramp was created to try and address. We want to give the business a roadmap to adoption based on business need rather than on technical detail. We want to prevent this perception that DMN is a mountain by providing a guide to the foothills and the individual camps up the mountainside, some of which make good places to get a good view, but also can be a place you can stay if you don't need to go any further up. So we believe that DNM is not an all or nothing proposition. The standard itself lends itself very well to incremental adoption. There are some small sets of DNM which are self-contained and have excellent business value in and of themselves, either as a step of progression or as a final place for some businesses that have specific requirements in mind. We need to educate users about these subsets. We need to show them which subsets of DMM are appropriate for their particular business problem and can deliver what's important to them at their particular stage of evolution. We need to help them select tools for their needs now and in the immediate future. And we need to make them aware of functionality that they may need in future that might not be available in some tools right now. We recognize as well that not all vendors will want to support all of DMN, and this is entirely healthy attitude. They might instead be focused just on the parts which are relevant to their customer base. And this acceptance, I think, allows a place for new vendors to join the DMN party. So in short, we believe in the right modeling tool for the job at hand, but the definition of that has to be first and foremost business focused. And it won't necessarily be the tool that is complete, and it certainly won't be the tool that is perfect. So how do we set about starting to do this? There are so far 3 main draft deliverables out of the DNM on-ramp. There are a set of scenarios. These are the subsets I talked about just now. Understanding what users need from DNM, what are the usage scenarios for decision modeling in their business. Next, there are the definition of the individual axes of tool functionality. So we need to tease apart all of the things that modeling tools should and can do and represent them as independent axes on a graph, if you like. And we call these dimensions. And lastly, we're going to look at how dimensions and scenarios are related. For a given user scenario, for a given business scenario of use of DNM, what progression in each of the dimensions is required. So let me go down in a little more detail about each of these 3 things. So one of our first deliverables was a definition of scenarios. And this is a business case for using a subset of DMN, a self-contained business case, which adds value to business users. And also associated with each scenario, there is a set of advised practices. We don't call them best practices, but certainly suggested or advised practices, which have been donated by experienced practitioners. Now, this set of scenarios doesn't enforce any kind of progressive adoption, but it could lead to companies being able to plan one. They might take a look at the available scenarios and say, we want to do A, C, and D, for example. And as far as education, we feel scenario gives a good classifier for the advised practices. If you want to see and benefit from the best knowledge of the longest practitioners in a particular business goal, just look at the advised practices that are associated with individual scenarios. So by way of illustration, let's look at some scenarios that are currently used. The simplest of these is probably decision inventory. This is the mining of simple definitions of a set of decisions in a particular business area, along with associated questions, the answers that to those questions, or how those answers are determined, and performance goal metrics. And the idea behind inventory is that it identifies high-value opportunities for further work and potentially later on decision automation. It may also involve producing simple context diagrams, and the goal of which is to explicitly recognize and differentiate and define key decisions in your organization, their semantics and their outcomes. And of course, the business benefits of these are well known to you: establishing clear goals, understanding decisions, identifying decisions which have been implicit up till now, and of course, in heightened consistency and reduction of unnecessary complexity. Decision definition is what many of you are very familiar with, defining decisions in detail and building a structural hierarchy in which decisions are broken down into sub-decisions for the purposes of promoting understanding. And of course, consensus and enabling some sort of continuous process of review and improvement. And this is vital now, because one thing we can be sure of is that decisions are changing ever faster. Decisions evolve much faster than processes, in my experience. And it's necessary, this hierarchy is necessary also to identify reuse candidates inside complex decision making to ensure consistency. And one of the unexpected benefits that Ryan alluded to early on in this scenario is to provide staff training materials, because I really can't think of a better way of getting to know a new business domain or getting to know a new company than having a set of decision models to work through. Of course, assuming that they're well documented and well defined. Data requirements definition is another scenario which focuses on identifying the input data needed to make a decision. In cases where the available data is subject to some question or expense, we need to understand how much of our automated decision making is possible given the limited information we have. What can we do with what we've got? We also need to understand the impact of provisioning additional data. And of course, the business value of this is that we don't over provision data, which is very expensive and more common than you might suppose. And we don't have gaps, because of course that just causes delay and project failure. Decision logic definition, I'm not going to bore you with a definition of this. Many of you know it better than I do. However, it's important to say here that we do this because, of course, as well as getting the logic, as well as enabling automation, we're getting additional transparency, accountability, and rigor in our decision making. And it leads to the ability to be able to deploy decision services. And a little known modification or variation of this business scenario is basic logic definition, which is a scenario which focuses on discrete logic being modeled, perhaps for process integration or perhaps some other purpose, where there's no apparatus of the DRD. There's no overarching decision, they're just discrete bits of logic. And another case, the decision-driven decision definition, which is essentially perhaps one of the newest scenarios, the use of decision modeling as a vehicle for introducing AI and machine learning, which has really come to prominence in the last 3 years of DMN, where these decisions essentially learn from data how to do things rather than being explicitly programmed. And even here, there are two different definitions of decisions. Those that are batch trained, in other words, they are subjected to data, are trained and then put into production, and those which continuously learn even in production. So they're using techniques like reinforcement learning to benefit and learn from each and every datum and case that comes their way. And here it's important to capture the assumptions you make about the distribution of your input data, because if the distribution changes, it can make your machine learning implementation much less effective. So the next stage is dimensions. What do we mean by that? A dimension is an independent axis of functionality of a decision modeling tool. Each dimension we defines a progressive partial order of tool facilities. And example dimensions include the ability of a tool to model DRDs, the ability of a product to model logic, the ability of products to support key performance indicators, and so on. Now we represent dimensions as a graph. And some of these dimensions are a linear chain, essentially a series of nodes connected with one line, which represent successive levels of improving sophistication in a particular area of functionality. Other dimensions are groups of related but distinct features, and there's much less linearity about them. And many of them are in between these two extremes, but they're all graphs and they all represent an incremental scale of functionality. This is a disciplined way to compare tools, much better than a scorecard. And in a little while, I'll show you how we try to make it even more advanced. Each tool will essentially have a coordinate in this multi-dimensional space. So for every axis, every tool will have a point which reflects its current position. Perhaps the best way to illustrate this is through example. So here's one of our current defined draft dimensions. It is the dimension of drawing DRDs. And like all dimensions, it represents a progression of the functionality from very basic on the left-hand side to advanced on the right-hand side. And each piece of each feature, each part of the functionality is represented by a square. And you can see we start over here with none, and then we progress to basic shapes and layout. So these arrows represent progression. They represent dependency of the right-hand side on the left-hand side. So you can see we'll require basic shapes and layout, and by that I mean input data, decision, and knowledge source. We require these three things in order to support any of these. For example, annotations and groups, styling, and decision services, which are further enhanced into invoked decision services and invoked business knowledge models. And validation, that is to say, we build DRDs which we only can build DRDs which are valid. We can't make inappropriate connections between the nodes of a DRD. And lastly, machine learning. So we feel there's a need for support for machine learning inside the DRD package, which isn't currently there. And so you can see from this color scheme, I hope, that a lot of the nodes are already covered by the DMN standard and are well defined by them. But a few are marked in orange and they're aspirational. Now, I want to make it clear as well that these words aren't just bandied about phrases. There's obviously associating a dimension. There's obviously a clear description of what each of these phrases mean with reference to the standard where appropriate. Okay, another dimension that we could talk about is decision logic definition. And again, this is a progression from free-form text to structured logic in this case, and to path languages, which can then be extended to support the range of functionality already defined very well in the standard. And we can also put decision tables on this dimension and decision trees and other ways of representing logic, some of which are aspirational, but most of which are already clearly supported by the standard. So what other dimensions have the group currently defined? Well, first of all, there's the dimension of repository support. And that means the extent to which a tool distinguishes between DRD diagrams as separate drawings, as opposed to being representative of an underlying decision requirements graph, allowing diagrams to be considered as multiple views on an underlying graph that is not itself visualized. The KPI dimension identifies how capable tools are at handling KPIs, both in defining them and monitoring them in real time. The decision implementation dimension is the extent to which tools support both local execution, either on a local server or inside the tool itself, simulation, sometimes involving animation of decisions, test case definition, and checking test case behavior against known correct values, and in more advanced cases, the ability to generate test cases automatically. Deployment into production or into other environments, and the analysis of execution, that is to say, looking at the frequencies with which certain decision paths were taken. Version control is the extent to which tool offers support for linear and branch-based revision control, including but not limited to the integration with tools such as Git or SVN and so on, but also, and perhaps more significantly, how well tools support the visual differencing of DRDs and logic. Can a product, for example, tell me exactly how user X changed the decision model on a particular day in the course of their duties? Allied but distinct from this is the concept of user collaboration, the degree of provision for in-tool communication of issues, feedback, and progress. Now, this is typically needed where you have large teams of modelers potentially working in different geographic locales, and they're all collaborating on the same model. It is not a substitute for human communication, but rather a way of providing a stateful situational awareness between members of a team at the level of granularity of individual artifacts in the decision model. Team and source management is about the support of shared vocabularies, dictionaries, ontologies, and it's a progression very similar to the very eloquent and excellent presentation by Denis Gagnon on Monday. And it also includes the integration of decision models with knowledge sources and the governance of those knowledge sources, and the use of knowledge sources as a potential means of helping explanation. So it would be, of course, very good, and is a current goal of tools to be able to explain why decision outcomes were the way they were, but it is also great to explain what authority dictated that behavior where that's appropriate, for example, in compliance legislation. Validation is about features like first, second, and third normal form violations, static analysis, range validation, the impact analysis, what would change if we did this, and also includes utilities like the compaction of rule sets. Security is the degree of sophistication a tool shows about how to handle access management, particularly role-based security and permissions-based access to individual hierarchies in a decision model. What are people allowed to see? What are people allowed to change? And how is that managed? And how do we integrate with external directories of identity? Interchange, of course, very important, the extent to which a tool supports interchange of parts of the model being developed, and how symmetrical this is. In other words, how well the input interchange is reflected by the output. It's not always fully symmetrical in many tools. And not listed here, the ability to support search and reporting. So this is the ability to find subparts of a model based on metadata, on potentially later on a semantic query, and produce reports, maybe subviews of a decision model corresponding to the query, or analysis such as complexity. And the final thing we want to talk about is maps. And a map is quite simply a relationship, a connection, a mapping between a scenario and a dimension. So it can be used as a scorecard, and it's somewhat better than a scorecard because unlike simple scorecards, this one has context-sensitive value. We're actually relating the association to a specific business need and deployment scenario. So for a given user scenario, a map answers the question, what features are essential, what features are nice to have, and which are extraneous in all but the most sophisticated projects. So maps just look like dimensions, except that they have additional markup. They progress from left to right, same structure as you saw before, except now this is a mapping between the dimension of DRD support and the scenario of decision definition. So what this map is telling us is that in the case that you're using decision modeling for the decision definition scenario, what support do you need in this dimension? And the statement so far, the draft we have so far is that basic shapes and layout, annotations and groups, basic validation are essential, decision services are nice to have, and everything else we feel is purely optional. But I stress this is a draft. I would be extremely surprised if we showed all of the maps we've developed thus far, if there weren't quite violent disagreements among the decision automation community about which markup should be used, and indeed the actual composition of the dimensions themselves. That's entirely natural and normal. The point I'm making here is basically the approach that we're taking, the ability to be specific about the tool needs given a particular business scenario. So how do these concepts help anybody at all? Well, they help users and potential adopters of decision modeling by helping them rather to work out which scenarios are relevant to them. It teaches them how DMN can help them and what the benefits it offers are for their particular business scenario. It helps them to learn about the associated advised practices for each of the scenarios. And if they wish, a set of scenarios could even provide an agile route map for DMN adoption, although this isn't a primary goal. Vendors are helped because it succinctly documents their compliance levels for each scenario. It can help them plan their roadmap on the basis of the scenarios important to their client base at the moment, and also to plan for the future. And consultants can use it to understand which skills are required to help their clients, and therefore which skills they need to help that to happen according to those scenarios, and also to help them plan their training for new scenarios that they'd like to be able to assist their clients with. So this is very much a work in progress. We are meeting regularly, but we need help. We need your help. So we'd like to invite you, please, to consider joining the OnRamp Review Committee. We're looking for industry practitioners, academics, vendors, or any combination of these, preferably with 5 or more years experience in process or decision automation or some associated discipline, and an energy and a passion, of course, for decision automation, which is, I hope, everyone who's listening. If you're interested and you'd like to find out more, please email us on this address. If you'd like to join the review committee, please do email us on this address. If you think we're wasting our time and we're full of strange ideas, please do email us on this address. Thanks very much indeed.
And we've worked with many customers over the years, and in some cases helping them to select technology. So, like some insurance companies and banks in the past who have we just don't know where to start. Is this a thing? Is this not a thing? What tools do I apply? And it's really, really difficult for them right now to make any sense of what's going on out there. as a place to start. So, the hope is to get folks together. Let's, make it easier for customers to buy the technology and to be successful with the technology and skills that all the folks in this practice have. And that's the target goal here. And thanks very much, Jan, for putting this together. I appreciate it. There's a lot of smarts that went into this from the team, and we're looking forward to taking this from draft to formal publication.
Jan and Ryan, great presentation. It's just having seen a very similar thing happen in the process side, where the standard is very big and isn't going to be completely 100% adopted by organizations who just want to be able to get some stuff done. I think the sort of the general philosophy that the perfect is the enemy of the good is like, let's just do something that's good enough that people can start to work with it, and then it will get more robust as we go along. And certainly we found with BPMN is that the subset of the standard is completely useful in some scenarios. It's not going to give you everything, but it's definitely a way to get started and to make it easier for people to, like you say, this sort of on-ramp program that you're having. So definitely, I think some great ideas there. We can open it up for questions now. So if you have a question and you're on Zoom and you want to ask the question yourself, just raise your hand and I will call on you and you can unmute your microphone. Or if you have a question you want to type on Slack, you can do that and I will read it out. Oh, Denny likes your initiative. I can't believe he's not involved. Like, come on.
I hope he will be.
There he is. Denis, please.
I'll show up to anything that I'm invited to.
There will be cake.
This is wonderful. It's really the third leg of the stool we were missing. So I think a community of practitioner is the right thing to do. It will complete very well the standard group and the TCK. Hopefully there's going to be a lot of good dynamics between these three groups. And I think that can just help this industry in many, many different ways. Naturally, like the TCK with the DMN revision task force of the formal thing, there's got to be some good balance of separation of concern and what needs to go from the TCK to the task force and what goes from the task force to the TCK. And the same thing now with the addition of this community of practice. It's going to be to establish that balance. But I think that everybody will benefit from this. So I applaud this and will love to be involved.
Excellent. We'll definitely reach out and we'll get that going. Thanks for those comments. Appreciate it.
Indeed.
So given there's no question now, what's your timeline? So I see you've put the baseline to break out the white page syndrome. So that's wonderful. As we all know, this is the toughest period, is to create that first thing that's on the table. What's your timeline? What's your staging look like?
Ryan, I think
so
you're best qualified for that, I think.
I'll go first, but feel free to jump in, Jan. So we don't have a fixed timeline at this point. We were just essentially meeting every couple of weeks and hacking away at it until we had, a decent first draft. It just happened to coincide with DecisionCAMP, so that was a good place to bring it forward, I think. So that our intention was just to give a glimpse to that right now, and have folks start to participate. So those are the kinds of things we still need to hammer out. What you saw today, I mean, there's obviously more of it that we've done in terms of different scenarios and dimensions and so forth, but that's really it so far. We were also worried that we didn't want to take it too far without getting everybody's participation in that too, because that would a lot of these topics can be controversial, of course, because everybody has their own interests and so forth. So I think we're at the point now where it's a good time to get folks in so that they can shape it as well. But I would imagine, the short answer, probably a few months out or a quarter out.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, DecisionCamp is such a marvelous forum for decision automation that in some ways we deliberately presented here, even though perhaps it was a little earlier than we would like, in order to give us greater incentive to get materials ready for reviewers as soon as we can. So it's a little bit like writing a book. You sometimes don't get your productivity at maximum until your publisher is baying at your door.
And we've had Alan Fish over on the Slack channel has said that he'd be pleased to be involved too. So I think that there's certainly a number of people who are watching this presentation who would be happy to step up and help out.
I'll reach out.
We'd be delighted. That's good
Okay.
news.
I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but we're moving into a break. And what we're going to do is leave the Zoom session open during the break. So if you guys want to hang around, if anybody else has any questions, I would say for people, if you just want to, if you're interested in chatting, just share your video, turn your mic on, and we're just going to have, like, for the next hour, just you can sort of pop in and out whenever. So I think probably some people might want to take a break. Some people might have some more questions for Jan and Ryan right now. And then we will be back at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we have another couple of presentations, and then we'll have some closing remarks from Jacob, and again, a little sort of an opportunity for chat or cocktail hour. But please use this as for whatever you like for the next hour. And we're going to turn off the recording. So